Okay, yeah, well, I see that half the people here are people who weren't here last time. So that suggests that quite a few people that were here last time decided they'd had enough.
They told their friends to come.
They told their friends to come. No, that was good, yeah. So I want to start off with a couple of things before I get to the three cults that were part of the church's schism of during the late last century. And one is that I really am appreciating, and I consider it a real blessing. Hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
Boy, it's amazing the wonderful people that will drop in. And good to see you again. So I wish I could do a little dance, Native American dance, but I'm just not good at it. Lois will tell you that I'm not good at that. Okay. So anyway, one thing is that I really made a lot of good friends among people I either never knew before or barely knew before. And I'll just give you 8 examples. Richard Price and his wife Pamela. Now many of you probably have heard of Richard Price, and a lot of people who remain faithful to the World Church just thought Richard Price was a terrible man, and how could I be friends with Richard Price? My mother probably thought that way. I'm not sure she did. If I ever told her that. And because her mother just rejected everybody. We had a few cousins and other good friends who went to the Restorationists, and she wasn't going to send them any more Christmas cards or nothing, you know. Mother was just a good, faithful, pointy widow. And but anyway, Richard Price, he became a wonderful friend of mine. I never knew him before at all, but I would walk into their bookstore on 23rd Street in Independence, and Richard's wife Pamela would say, "Oh, Bill, Richard's in his office. He'd love to see you." So I'd go in his office and we'd talk for an hour, and about everything. And I found him to be just as honest and straightforward person. I disagreed with him on just about everything. I can't think of any religious question that we agreed on. We probably did on one or two, but I just found him very honest and delightful fellow. And he returned the favor, I guess, when I brought Brad Carr and some students that were taking my winter term on comparative RLDS groups, and so at the end, during the session, Richard Price said to my students, "Well, your teacher is an honest liberal." so he returned the favor to me. But anyway, I love the guy. And when he got sick, he was sick for quite a while before he died, but I was determined to go to his funeral. Mark Shear, the church historian, was going to go to the funeral with me, because he wanted to, but he said, "I'm only going to go with you. You'll be my protection." But it turned out I was sick that week, and I couldn't go, so Mark didn't go. He didn't have any protection. But anyway, but Richard Price and I became great friends, as well as Pamela, his wife. I remember one session in his office where he told me some of the crazy things that Restorationists say about us, and I told him some of the crazy things. You know, we both corrected errors that either side, some people on either side were making, and it was just a wonderful session. Now another person is Barney Fuller. Now Howard and I both knew Barney. I think we both knew Barney at Graceland. And when Barney started publishing Zion's Warning in the early 70s, some of you might possibly remember that. Well, I taught the history of religion in America, and I thought, well, students taking that course might as well know a little bit about Barney. And so I had Barney come to class, and every year I'd have him come to class one day, and he would tell me his wild conservative views about the church and everything. Churches go to hell, and how we've already joined the National Council of Churches, and he said, one of his newspapers, he said, why is there something wrong with our diet or something, because it used to be that some of the great people in the Bible lived to be 900 years plus. And Barney died when he was 75, so he apparently never figured out how to eat right to get to the 900 years. But anyway, Barney, when he well, after a while he quit the RLDS church. He decided that Mormonism, Latter-day Saintism writ large, doesn't make any sense anymore. He got rid of Joseph Smith, but he became a Pentecostal preacher. I visited him once near Houston, and we had a good conversation and everything. And but anyway, when he would come, he sold athletic equipment. When he would come north, he would stop at 3 old liberal friends. He would stop and see Lloyd Young in Springfield, one of his faculty members. He would see Dick Hughes, who was pastor at Stone Church for quite a while, and then he'd come and see me. One time I picked up the phone, I'm at my office, and he says, "Phil, you want to get together for coffee?" Actually, I hate coffee, but sorry, Jack. But I said, well, it's a long way to go for coffee down to Houston, you know. He said, "But no, I'm at the." He was one of the watering holes in Independence. I mean in Lamoni. And so I said, "Sure, I didn't have class for another hour or so. I'll come on down." And I went down and saw him. But anyway, although after a while, it got to where he spent quite a bit of time spieling what I regard as old McCarthyite, right-wing political stuff. And when he got onto that, I think he saw my eyes kind of blurring, and pretty soon he quit, and he went on. I didn't say anything against what he was saying, I just had a hard time following it. But anyway, and then Bill Wenham. Didn't any of you know Bill Wenham? He lived in Lamoni for a while. He was a barber, but he barbered in Independence with his dad finally. And I used to go down, living in Independence, I would go down to Lamoni during the summer, once or twice, and I'd always get my hair cut at Bill Wenham's barbershop on Truman Road. And we had a great time, and he got involved in the Restoration Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which was kind of faded away. They appointed a president. Bill got appointed to be an apostle, and Bill was a great missionary. He was the first missionary. I mean, the first person to convert somebody in South Korea. He was a war veteran, still active in the war, and he converted several people. But he was only a priest, so he could only baptize him. They had to bring in somebody from Independence later to confirm them. But I really felt sorry for Bill, because he loved the church. I mean, he loved the tradition that he grew up in the 1940s and 50s, and he tried hard. He tried the Restoration branch, but he couldn't stand the new prophet, and he left them, even though they named him an apostle earlier. And he kept looking for the true church, and he could never get. He finally established a little church not too far from Independence. It was kind of just his church with his friends and relatives, and then he died about 15 years ago. I just felt sorry for him. I mean, he was, when I would go in to get my hair cut, in fact, I sometimes felt sorry for the people that came in to get their hair cut, because one time there was 2 people waiting to get their hair cut, and every now and then he'd turn off the clippers and talk for about 10 minutes. I felt like saying, "Bill, don't you have some customers?" But anyway, he was a wonderful guy, but life was tough for him when he got back from Korea. And then there's David Bowerman. David Bowerman, some of you probably know, he was appointee stake president in 4 different stakes: Council Bluffs, to Tulsa, Kansas City, and then Blue Valley. And he was in Blue Valley in 1984, and as stake president, he voted against the revelation on women. And so he was having such a hard time dealing with all the flack he was getting from the people in Blue Valley, the less than 50% who were supportive of the World Church. So finally, at least he told me that he just told the presidency, why don't you give me a less abusive assignment? And so they just assigned him to the real estate group in the auditorium, along with Bob Brew, who many of you know, and so forth. And for about 6 years then, until he retired, he told the presidency, I won't go to any restoration branches before I retire. But he didn't promise not to after he retired. After he retired, he became really a big leader in the restoration movement and founded the Council of the Conference of Restoration Elders. And then later on, he's the guy who really started the Remnant Church, which is the largest of the churches that have actually got a profit and are filling all the seats in the priesthood. Anyway, the way I got involved with Bowerman, the only contact that I had come in before was okay. Now you folks can all hear me. The only contact I had with David Bowerman before was when I was the editor of the youth magazine Stride. I wrote an article against the death penalty, and David Bowerman, stake president, one of those stakes, wrote a letter to the editor criticizing my letter. He cited Doctrine and Covenants, I think it was section 42, I think, in which Joseph Smith indicated, kill him. I mean, no, it's all right to do, to use the death penalty. So anyway, but Bowerman, the Remnant Church was just, the headquarters was just across the street from our church's parking lot. And so if I came down to do work in the archives, I'd call across the street and I'd say, Dave, do you want to have lunch together? And he'd say, oh yeah, let's do this. We'd always go to Subway, which is fine with me. I like Subway. And there's two of them in Independence. We go one or the other. But anyway, one day he was trying to get a direct descendant of Joseph Smith, which I'll be honest with you, I think was a terrible mistake. But anyway, and for us too. But anyway, so he one day he says, well, let's. Do you mind if we stop at the Independence Police Department, not to go in to be arrested or anything, but to pick up a guy named Fred Larson, and who's Paul Edwards' cousin. I knew a lot about Fred just from Paul, because Paul and I were good buddies, talked a lot, and so I knew exactly what was happening. He had found his prophet. Dave Bowerman had found his prophet, because Fred Larson is the direct descendant of Joseph Smith through his mother. And so we picked up Fred, and we had a good time. And Fred became a good friend also. In fact, he and his wife Mary took me and a good Mormon friend, name is slipping me right now, but he was a pretty big Mormon who was the director of the Mormon Research Center at the University of Utah State. But anyway, Fred and his wife took me and my friend to where they were building Zion. About 10. See, he was a direct descendant of Fred M. Smith, and he was a disciple of Fred M. Smith. Fred M. was really big on Zion, and he was building the Zion for their church about 10 miles east of Independence. They had, I don't know, 100 acres or more, probably more. I'm sure it was more than that. And so anyway, yeah, he was a really good friend. And as I looked at it, though, I thought, you know, an awful lot of your leadership were high priests in Independence who are kind of senior citizens, and they've established they had good jobs, They have nice houses in Blue Springs and so forth, in Independence and so forth. They're not going to want to. They're not going to want to move out there, 10 miles from Zion. And I don't think it's worked very well, but I don't really know how it stands for now. But anyway, so Bowerman and I became great friends, and Larson becomes the president of the church. And Larson told me 2 or 3 times that Bowerman's always criticizing everything I'm doing, and Bowerman told me 2 or 3 times that I really don't, I don't agree with a lot of things that Larson has done. I think Bowerman should have just directed the church himself instead of. And actually, Larson back in '76, he got his friend Paul Edwards during World Conference to go to lunch with him. And he said, 2 years from now, when our cousin Wallace B. Smith becomes the president of the church, he's going to name us his counselors. And I felt like saying, I said, Paul, sure. A guy who's an educated man who's got his degree in medicine, he's become the head of a world church, and he's going to pick a first presidency that's 3 cousins from Independence, Missouri. And I'm sure that's going to happen. And of course it didn't, but anyway, but still, I really enjoyed him. I enjoyed Dave Bowerman, I enjoyed Fred Larson. Brad and Tim Carr were great friends of mine. Ron Smith here in town, great friend of mine. Richard Neal, one of my students, he came to my house about 3 months ago. We spent the day talking about the situation in his church and our church. He said, both of our churches are dying. Both of our churches are losing members really bad. And he was aware of the fact that neither one of us are doing well. And I said, well, I guess I'd have to agree. So anyway, that has been a real blessing in my life. I've had people who say, you're a friend of Richard Price? It's usually Richard Price because he's the best known. I say, yeah, he's a wonderful guy. He's dead now, unfortunately, but he's a wonderful guy, and I'm glad that I got to know him well. Well, I'll just say one other thing a couple things before I get to the cults. The church handled the issue of homosexuality in the national conferences in 23, 24, 25 far better than they did in 1984. In 84, I'll just use my friend Dale Luffman, and most of you knew Dale. Dale was very good to me, and I really liked him. We were good friends. But Dale had a very high view of the authority of the church. I saw that from day one when I met him. But I went and I got acquainted with him because I was working on a book on the Lundgren cult murders, and then there came a point then when let me just start over with Richard Price again. Richard, when they decided to silence him, and O.C. Hinson was the stake president in Center State. This is when they did it right. So O.C. invited Richard in and for a discussion about he was going to be silenced. And so Richard told O.C., and I've heard the tape. Richard says, I brought a tape recorder, and I'd like to have his tape record this, and I'll give you a copy of the tape, and I'll have a copy. Is that okay? I think most appointees would have said no. But O.C. Hinson said, yeah, that'd be fine. And so I've heard the tape probably from Richard. And anyway, in the tape, Richard says, well, O.C., I'm doing what I got to do. And O.C. says, I understand, and I'm doing what I got to do. And Richard said, yeah, I understand. And it's about a 40-minute discussion, and I think they went away good friends. That's the way it ought to be. Richard Price has worked real hard in the church for a long time. If he's going to be silenced, he ought to be silenced at least with a personal conversation or at least a telephone call. I mean, some kind of direct communication. But Dale Uffman in Kirtland, my good friend Dale, I love him to death. He's gone now, as you know. But when the Kirtland Saints were really divided between left and right, and finally, eight members of the right wing of the church in Kirtland published a letter in the local paper saying, "We just don't agree with this women in the priesthood thing. I think the church has gone wrong on that." And so Dale, it was the weekly newspaper, kind of like the Lamoni Chronicle, on the latter part of the week. So on Monday, Dale has his secretary type letters to all 16 people, silencing them. So they all get letters on Tuesday being silenced. Well, I know some of those guys who had been real active in the Kirtland congregation for decades, and big leaders. I mean, the guy that was the architect, whose name is slipping me now, my Parkinson's, it kicks in quite a bit. But he became a very good friend, and he'd been, I think, kind of the lay leader of the Kirtland congregation forever and ever. And he was silenced with a letter. I think that was just terrible. But anyway, when the homosexual issue came up, it was just handled so much differently. We were told over and over again, basically, we love these people that don't accept gay rights or gay marriage or gay priesthood, and we still want to keep them in the church, and we want to hold their hand and so forth. And Joe Shelton, who you probably all know, he used to live in Illinois. He grew up in Illinois, and there was a guy from Illinois who spoke on the negative side on just about every issue that came up. And when the last one came up, and there was no to know, this guy just stalks out of the auditorium. But Joe chases him out, follows him out of the auditorium, and Joe, talks to him, and he's trying to say, hey, we still want you. Don't leave us. You're still a valued member of the church and stuff. And the guy finally says, "Okay, I'll probably be back to the next World Conference." So Joe and O.C. Henson handle it the way it ought to be handled. And so that's why our good friend, some of you might know him, Todd Davison. He had an article not an article, but just a short piece in the Herald, just a couple months after, or just maybe a month after our national conference. And he's a gay man, and he was saying, I realize this time I was on the right side. On the side, the winning side, and I felt really bad for the people on the losing side. Well, we didn't see that. At least I didn't see that, and a lot of people have told me they didn't see that. 4 decades earlier, whenever it was, and with the other one. So anyway, I wish we had virtually a whole new batch of general authorities of the church by 2013, and it's too bad that they went around a lot earlier in those positions. And I think, okay, one other thing then, I think when a group like the early Christian church, for example, has a struggle, the Gnostic struggle in the early Christian church is a good example. Typically, to help solve the situation, they give more power to the leaders. And so what they did in the early Gnostic crisis was they declared that various documents were apostolic. Anyway, they made an appeal to apostolic authority. So apostolic succession, apostolic writings, the books, all the books in the New Testament are apostolic in the terms of they either have the name of an apostle on them, or they have the name of a very close person to an apostle, like Mark and Luke in the Gospels. And so in our situation, the fact was that the church leadership had extreme power to begin with. They had the power of revelation. There's 5 big issues that had been solved in the church, with women being the 5th one. In each case, the president of the church had favored one side of the debate, and finally a revelation is produced, and every time the president of the church wins. The guy with the power of revelation wins. Big surprise. And then secondly is control of the church press. Well, the Herald House, the Saints Herald has gone through various changes after the Supreme Directional Controls battle in the 1920s. The presidency can grab control of the Herald, so the wrong type of people won't be writing articles in the Herald. But then somehow they relinquished control along the way. When I was there in the early 70s, early 60s, I got this great article from Bill Blue, African-American pastor of a segregated church. It's an article that I'd solicited from him because Carl Mesley had recommended it, and I consider it the best article that was ever published during my 4 years as editor of Stride. But anyway, I get a call from one of the brethren, and the article come in, and it was wonderful. He was very candid about all the garbage you take as a black person in the Deep South running an RLDS segregated church. And so I just was so excited by his article. So I told some of my friends, like Dick Lancaster, my brother-in-law, and others. And pretty soon I get a call from a general authority, and in fact it's the apostle who's in charge of the Deep South. He says, "Hello, Brother Russell. Hi. This is Brother Oakman." And I said, "Oh, how you doing, Brother Oakman?" "Oh, fine, fine." He says, "I understand that you have an article by Brother Blue, it's probably going to be highly controversial." I said, "Oh," I was still naive about church politics, and I said, "Oh, Brother Blue, it's a wonderful article. You'll love it." And I said, I could make a copy of it and send it to you." I'm so glad that he said, "Oh, well, I probably shouldn't be in a position of reading articles before they're published." I said, "Well, okay." Well, then later that day, I told Roger Yarrington, who hired me and who was the managing editor, and he said, "Oh no," he says, never send an article to the First Presidency or the 12. If you think it's a good article, you publish it, and then if they don't like it, then they can tell you about it. They can tell you about it later. I thought that's a good policy. But anyway, when Roger came back later, when we had a new First Presidency, new counselors of the First Presidency, it was different. I used to like to come down to Independence and eat lunch with Roger once a year or so. And after he came back with the new system, I went down and asked him. I says, "Well, is the old system still in play?" And he was usually pretty tight-lipped. He just said something like, "Well, things aren't always the same," or something like that. Yeah, they clearly weren't the same, because I know who the First Presidency assigned to take care of the publications. So anyway, then they have the power of appointment, and in addition to controlling the church press, they have the power of appointment.
Bill, are you talking about W. Wallace or Wallace B. when you say the new presidency?
Oh, well, it's Wallace B., but I'm not so much talking about Wallace B. as the top fellows that worked in, his 2 counselors and other high officials in the church. I don't know, see, because frequently I'm seeing a message from, I've got a lot of letters from different church officials. I never see one from Wallace B. It's always from one of the counselors or one of the apostles or the stake president. I don't really know who is the person who really made this happen, so I really can't figure that out. I tend to think that Wally B. was great, a great president in the sense of that he saw he needed to really do a lot of research and everything to understand what's going on in the church. But he didn't have any experience in church politics, let's say. And so I think he appointed people that were too powerful. But I don't know. I don't really know. He maybe he wanted to. Maybe he directed these guys to do these things. Who knows? Yeah. Good question. And yeah, it's a good question when you can't give a good answer at all. So anyway, that's something I wanted to say. But I'm going to add one thing. My hero, Dick Howard. When W. Wallace had in the '86 conference, the first conference since women were to be ordained, and a good friend of mine, Paul Ludi, Bill Murray knows him well, but Paul Ludi, and I've known him for a long time, he was the main spokesman on several issues before the conference, but one of them was to rescind Section 156. And Wallace B. Smith made the motion he ruled the motion out of order. He said, since only a prophet can make the resolution, make a revelation, only a prophet can rescind the revelation. And Dick, I was sitting up in the balcony, and I was just blowing my mind. I mean, he's taking away the right of future world conferences to correct an error. Usually the last person to correct a mistake is the person who made it. I mean, you've got to have a better policy than that for correcting a mistake. Only if the guy that made the mistake recognizes it and says, okay, let's correct it. That's the only, I said, it just doesn't make any sense. Then I was so pleased when a couple of years, about 4 years later, Dick Howard came out with Volume 2 of his church history, and he agreed with me. So obviously he's really good. But no, I mean, he recognized that that's a terrible policy. I mean, all these people were taken away the possibility that they might need to use the power of being an appointed member of the World Conference to act to correct a mistake. You don't have the right to. Sorry, folks. You just don't have the right to. Forget it. And I thought, gosh, this is an article. This is a 2-volume book that's included. That's basically approved by the first president because it's a Herald House book. Did they read it? I don't know. I'm going to try to find that out. But anyway, I'm not ready. I'm going to move on to the 3 cults because I've used too much time. I thought I'd go kind of in reverse order of how well the cults are known. And so, the first one, let me define cult. Jan Ships, who's a Methodist, who has spent her professional life, much of it writing about Mormonism, and she's written a lot of good stuff, but I'm pretty critical of her never addressing issues of race or sex. She's done that just so the big daddies in Salt Lake City will talk to her, and she's real proud of the fact that she's the one they always consult with. But Salt Lake Tribune, which is the other newspaper, they often would call Paul Edwards for me, so they're obviously better. Anyway, a cult is a group where one person takes really full control of the group. And so a sect then is a group which is trying to recover a lost tradition. And I would argue that the RLDS Church in the 1980s, or 74, when it first started, until the late 20th century, was a sect. It was trying to recover a lost tradition because especially the early RLDS beliefs were quite close to the beliefs of the church in Kirtland, because we basically rejected all the stupid things that Joseph II, sorry. I mean, polygamy, plurality of gods, baptism for the dead, secret temple rituals. I mean, which of those would you want in your church? You know, and I call them Joseph II's novel innovations. They're all terrible. But so we, because of Joseph III, he gradually pushes those aside. Like Joseph is just real new as president, having a meeting of the apostles, and some of these apostles, of course, knew about Joseph Jr.'s polygamy and so forth, and other things. And so one of them said, well, you know, Joseph Smith taught plurality of gods. And young Joseph said, well, okay, but let's don't make it an issue of a required issue. I can't remember the terms that's typically used for that. But let's don't make it a expectation or whatever. Okay, so it just faded away because as those guys died, especially, nobody saw any value in believing in such a stupid thing as the plurality of God. And so other issues like baptism for the dead and so forth, you know, Joseph just sort of lets a lot of those they just sort of die because they didn't make any sense. And so anyway, I think young Joseph really was good at making sure they didn't believe in any of these really crazy things. So I think he was only 11 when his father was killed, and certainly you don't believe that Emma taught him all this garbage. I mean, Emma was smarter than that, and she was a Methodist earlier. He didn't learn that kind of stuff from Emma, and you know. So anyway, I think the 11-year-old future prophet, he came in not having been acquainted with these silly doctrines, recognized them. Plus, his group is living in the Midwest. It's a lot easier to believe in those crazy ideas of being in Salt Lake, in Utah, and practically everybody else is a member of your church, and that's what your prophet says. But if you're living in Illinois, northern Illinois, Wisconsin, southern Michigan, among mostly a Protestant society, you didn't want to have to defend that garbage, and so it made sense what he did. So we have three cults. Ron Livingston, and I'm going to lead him to last. He's in rural Davis City, because I think everybody here knows a decent amount about him. And then there was, but then you probably don't know anything, many of you, about Stan King and his son Fred King in Owen Sound, Ontario, Canada. He was converted in a missionary series led by Al Pelletier. Al Pelletier was a young missionary, very, very good one. But Pelletier was very flashy, and I know my dad used to wonder, does Pelletier convert them to Christ or to himself? But anyway, this one guy that he converted in Owen Sound, Ontario, within about 8 years or so, he became a prophet. And for some reason, I got a letter from him in early 1970, in which he was declaring himself a prophet. I don't know how he got a hold of my address and why he should write to me. I'm glad he did. I've got a date. I know at least by, I think it's February of '07, he was calling himself a prophet. Now, some of you didn't remember the guy that was appointee from Canada who came to Graceland in the early part of the century, Carmen Thompson. He was from Owen Sound, and Fred Larson began to have meetings in the afternoon on Sunday, And Carmen went to him just because they were having, they talked about scripture and they talked about other stuff. Then finally one day, Carmen began to recognize that that Stan King had a second wife. At least there was this woman that he was paying too much attention to anyway. So Carmen confronts King in his kitchen. Says, Stan, I think you're carrying on a marital type relationship with this woman. Stan says, well, yeah, you're right. I figured you'd recognize that, but I was told by God to do it. And I said, oh no, God, I can't do that. I know what the scripture says. And God said, oh no. God pointed out some other scripture or something. So God convinced him to go ahead and do it. So he got to have the affair with this other woman. But anyway, so there was a woman named Carol Christie. And Carol Christie's story is just so sad. But anyway, Carol Christie, I better find my notes on her. I got one the wrong way, I'm sorry. But Carol, one day, Carol had been raised RLDS. She was now about 17 years old. Now her mother's taken her to Stan's meetings. And finally, and then her mother says, well, Carol, the prophet wants to marry you. The prophet's about twice her age. And so Carol says, well, I don't want to marry him, you know. She's a 17-year-old girl. She has visions of meeting the man of the hour, you know, and marrying him and living happily ever after. And she doesn't want to marry some guy twice her age, even though he is a prophet. And she says, oh yeah, you've got to marry him. And so anyway, she was forced to marry this guy, the prophet. Well, they had 2 kids, 2 boys, and the prophet controlled her life. She wanted to be a nurse. She was working in a hospital. She was starting to take nurses training and so forth. But the prophet said, no, you gotta help with the farm. You've got to work on the farm over here. So she had to quit her job, work on the farm. Fred was the good prophet. Because Fred dies, and Stan dies. And I remember Carmen Thompson, when I interviewed him, he told me Larson had 3 sons, but Fred, the youngest one, was considered to be the sharpest one by far, the obvious one to take the place of his dad whenever his dad died. It's hard to imagine because Fred Larson was just about the most mean person you could ever imagine. And they'd have meetings. Their meetings were held Sunday evening, and they'd go on for 2 or 3 hours, and he'd be chastising people all the time for their sins. Like, Benita, you washed the wrong clothes yesterday. So, wow, I might smash it in the head, you know. I mean, he beat up on his people.
You're talking about Stan King, right?
I'm talking about Fred King.
Okay.
The child.
The second one.
Okay,
The
Fred
second
King.
one.
Okay.
Fred King, the second prophet. He inherited all of his father's wives and all of his father's property. And so he eventually had more than 10 wives. And yeah, he was just terrible. So Carol's first child managed to escape. And she was happy about that. She almost tried to escape with him, but she didn't. But the problem was, Fred was so strong on, if you leave us, you'll go to hell. I mean, you'll go right straight to hell. I'm telling you, Richard, you'll go right straight to hell if you run away. And so finally, she got beat so bad, Carol got beat so bad by him, she said, okay, this is it. She'd had about 30 years in this asylum, in this mission. And so she decides she's going to go. And so she said to her youngest son, okay, I'm going to leave. I'm going to come with me. He said, I'd like to, but I'm just afraid I'll go to hell. And so he stayed. And so anyway, when she got out, she finally she never got cooperation with the police, in sound, because Fred would go to the door and he'd sweet talk them all, and they'd say, well, it probably was a false alarm stand, keep it up. And so, but now he got out, and I've seen a lot of the literature that various newspapers in Owen Sound all the way over to Toronto carried about the case. And so Fred King went to prison for about a year. He was sentenced to almost 2 years, but he got out after about a year, which really made Carol unhappy. But anyway, so that was this wonderful sect, this wonderful cult by Fred King and his brother. Okay, I'm going to go on to Jeff Lundgren unless you have any other thoughts. Okay, Jeff Lundgren you might know about, but he was raised in Independence. He had an extended family, including his grandma and grandpa, who had a lot of influence on everybody's life in the family, including Jeff's mother and father. And so she was kind of the matriarch of the family, which made Jeff's wife wonder, they're strong against women being in priesthood, and yet grandma is the king of the family, the queen of the family. And so, but anyway, after Section 156 comes down, Jeff decides, okay, I'm a priest, and presidencies failed, the apostles have failed, the bishops have failed, the evangelists have failed, and the high priests and the elders. I guess the priests are going to have to save the church. And he saw in the newspaper that there's going to be an advertisement. They needed a couple to come and help in Kirtland Temple, and all they would get would be free housing and utilities in that housing. The house was quite close to the Kirtland Temple. So when he applied for the job, he told them. They said, well, how are you going to finance yourself? And he said, well, my grandparents gave me their inheritance early, so I have about 2 years of income to live on for the next 2 years. So no problem. Okay, we'll take it. Well, they forgot all about the fact that 2 years came and gone, and now it was the third year, because he was getting money from people, conservative people who come to Kirtland, visit the temple. That was a big thing for them, and he often would hit them up for money. But the thing they didn't know was that Jeff was doing such a good job. Jeff was doing such a good job that Bill Lord, the chairman of the Kirtland Temple, and his wife Eleanor was taking care of the money. The money would be the money that came in the basket, the collection basket in the temple at the end of the day, and then also in the purchase of books and stuff in the library next door. And so Bill said to his wife, why don't we let Jeff take charge of the finances? He's doing a really great job. And he was doing a great job. Well, they didn't know that just before Jeff had been ordained a priest in Independence, he'd been found guilty of stealing money from the Drum Farm. Some of you know where the Drum Farm is in Independence. He'd been found guilty of stealing money from the Drum Farm, but somehow he must have pled guilty, and somehow it didn't make the newspaper. And so not too long after that, he was ordained a priest, and now he's in Kirtland Temple. And now he's got access to the money at the Kirtland Temple every day. And so, like, if you look at the money at Kirtland, before Jeff had the money, when Eleanor had the money, he would be like this month after month. And then when Jeff had the money, it goes way down. and it was for 2.5 years. For 2.5 years, he stole the money. And they estimated at about $30,000. He must have snitched, just based on the estimates from how much was missing from normal collections in the past. And they had pretty similar attendance, so you'd expect a pretty similar collection. So anyway, he ultimately, I'll just shorten it because we're getting late. Jeff ultimately kills 5 people in the family. That he decided that these 5 members of the family are always going to, they're never, mom and dad are never going to repent of all their sins, and neither are the kids, because the kids are just like their parents. All 3 are girls. I think that was an important fact too, because Jeff was a male chauvinist pig like you have never met. And I spent 7 hours interviewing Jeff in Kirtland Temple. I spent 40 days visiting people in prison in Kirtland during that time. And so anyway, I just shortened it. Jeff ended up in prison with the death penalty. The Kirtland Temple chief of police became a good friend of mine. Whenever I come to Kirtland, we'd go jog in the Kirtland Temple, in the Kirtland High School track, or we'd go out in the woods someplace and hike. And he became a real good friend of mine, and he said, he pointed out lies that Jeff had been telling us. I won't go into the lies because our time is running short. And so anyway, Jeff finally was executed after 16 years waiting in 2016. Let's see, it would be about 10 others that had extensive prison terms. Several of them got out after 21 years, including Debbie Oliveras. Lois and I became good friends with Debbie because she had come to Singles Reunion before Lois and I were involved. Now we'd gotten married, Lois and I, but Lois and I were both on staff now, and Lois was handling the people who would send in their money for the reunion. And so one day I came into the house at lunchtime, and Lois tosses the paper over to me. I look at it. Debbie Oliveras. She was a good friend. I visited her 3 times, and she had been screwed royally by the authorities. They told her they'd get her out in just a few years, and then they just totally left her in the lurch and let her out. In fact, they told her later on, oh, you'll probably do 20 years instead of the 3 that we thought you'd get out. Well, she got out after 21. Anyway, so after about 3 or 4 years, Debbie Oliveras became the chairman of the Singles Reunion. Now, Lois and I and the others, we didn't share that information with the church's legal department in Independence, because if you know what happened to the Moeller fellow, you don't, something like that. When you know somebody is straight-laced, she'd already had another job. I mean, she's had 2 or 3 jobs in Independence, and all good jobs. She's an outstanding person, and she's good. Well, anyway, I'm sorry, we only got about 5 minutes left at that, and we haven't done Ron Livingston. I'm sorry to the Bashirs up there if that's what you're looking for, but anyway, most of you know Ron Livingston, and anyway, he's okay. Livingston is by far the least offensive cult, but he clearly was in charge of everything. You know, you needed to do what Livingston said if you wanted to get along in the cult, and whereas the one in Canada, he was just a terrible abuser, but Jeff was a killer. So that's my 3 levels of difficulty of these. So anyway, Ron, born near Oregon, he comes to Independence. He goes to Graceland. He has a welding shop. He gets disciples. Pretty soon he decides to run for the Lamoni school city council, and he says, we've committed ourselves to service to Lamoni the rest of our lives. And then Bob Brew silences him, and then pretty soon they moved to the city area there, and all of a sudden, Lamoni has become Babylon. And so there's that prophecy of that in 1990, at the time of World Conference, Independence and Lamoni are going to be destroyed, and only the good people will be left out on the land and so forth. But Livingston, that didn't happen. A guy named Festinger, we only got a couple minutes, a guy named Festinger has written a great book called When Prophecy Fails. And he says when prophecy fails, then usually some people leave, but then the prophet reinterprets what went on, and the other half, the other part anyway, they get restored in their faith by the new interpretation. That's what happened to the Jehovah's Witnesses in about 1918. And so a decent number of people leave, and a decent number of people stay. And Lee Searles was one of the ones that left, he and his wife and everything. And Lee began to write a master's thesis at Iowa State University on the land, and he wasn't getting. I mean, he got really good response at first when he was just getting, written responses, and now he was going to respond to people in person. But then Ron Livingston sued him. And Carol Clark was the attorney, and so I wrote a letter to the Register. And I said, why is Iowa State even listening to this guy? This is a, I mean, I have a law degree. This is a lawsuit without any merit. It's a frivolous lawsuit. It should have been just thrown out. Why is Iowa State University not? Why are they taking this guy seriously at all? Well, anyway, Livingston thought that I was criticizing him. Actually, I was criticizing the lawyer. The lawyer should have known better than take a case like this. But anyway, he finally settled. That is, my friend finally settled, and he sort of finished the MA thesis, and he got his MA degree. But he really didn't get to finish the thesis, and I thought that was terrible. So anyway, I think this is probably time to quit, because it is